We are standing at a crossroads in human history. It's not the usual kind of crossroads that we talk about. This one has nothing to do with the catastrophe of climate change or the wondrous promise of artificial intelligence. This is the kind of crossroads after which we understand our world really differently. Like in 1900, that was the year we rediscovered the works of Gregor Mendel. If you don't remember, Mendel was a 19th century monk who painstakingly bred pea plants and laid the foundation for today's genetic science. It was the year that Sigmund Freud published The Interpretation of Dreams. He introduced us to the subconscious and laid the foundation for modern psychology. Mendel and Freud radically reoriented the way we understood our world. We understood it one way in 1899 and really differently just a year later. That is the kind of crossroads we're at now. Here's why. Many scientists now believe that most of our behavior is dictated by social cues. They believe that nearly everything you and I say and do is grounded not in our biology, in our own particular histories, but in hundreds or thousands of social cues that we're picking up and processing every day. We are finely tuned satellite dishes, processing signals from everyone around us, and then making decisions, largely unconscious decisions, about what to do in response. I know this is disempowering, but we're social animals. And this is what social animals do. We're like ants that form colonies or birds that fly in formation, except more so. For us, it's about unwritten rules. Unwritten rules dictate how we behave, tell us how to behave at home, at school, at work, and everywhere in between. Sure, there are written rules. There are millions of them. There are constitutions and laws and ordinances and regulations and policies, but that ain't nothing. We are juggling many, many more unwritten rules. In fact, anytime we're around other people, it's unwritten rules, not written rules, that dictate how we behave. You're driving down a freeway. The posted speed limit, a pretty simple, straightforward written rule, is 65 miles an hour. So how fast are you allowed to drive? 65? No. You're supposed to drive about the same speed as everybody else. If the speed limit is 65 and everybody around you is driving 75, you can drive 75, it's okay. The unwritten rule wins. Or let's say you're in an office building. You're on the 4th floor and you want to go down to the lobby. You push the button for the elevator comes, the doors open. Inside is a handful of other people. You step inside, you push L for lobby, and then you turn around and face the doors. Except today you don't. Today, you face everybody else on the elevator, and you smile. You smile your biggest, friendliest smile. And you smile at them all the way down from 4 to 3 to 2 to the lobby. Uncomfortable, right? You hated it, and I promise you, they wanted to kill you. And that's because you violated an unwritten rule about how to behave with other people on an elevator. It's not written anywhere, and yet it's followed everywhere. That kind of calculus about how to behave on a freeway or how to behave in an elevator, we're doing all day, every day. Now, we've known about unwritten rules for at least 2,500 years. The ancient Romans called them lex non scripta. And scientists have been studying them since the 1930s. So they're not a party trick. In fact, they're critical to how we function. So there are a few things you ought to know about how they work. 1, unwritten rules have been the tool of choice for managing societies for 200,000 years. Think about it. From the very earliest humans until 1754 BC, all rules were unwritten rules. It wasn't until 1754 BC that somebody, namely King Hammurabi of Mesopotamia, bothered to write any rules down. There were 282 of them, and they included some classics, like an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth. And about 1,100 years later, in 600 BC, somebody wrote down all the rules in the book of Leviticus, from the Jewish Torah, the Christian Old Testament. Now, Leviticus has 613 rules. Some of them are serious, like no lying. And others are less serious, like one all of us are violating right now. No mixing fabrics in your clothing. 2, unwritten rules help us figure out how to juggle written rules. As I said before, we are subject to a ridiculous number of written rules, more than we could ever remember, much less follow. But unwritten rules help us figure out which ones we should care about. For example, Deloitte did a study and found that 91% of Americans sign user agreements without ever reading them. And that number is even higher, 97%, for Americans ages 18 to 34. Now, this doesn't bother us very much, and we're not all that surprised, because even though user agreements are legally binding documents, we've decided that they're not that important. Unwritten rules to the rescue. 3, we learn unwritten rules by watching other people. Whether you're aware of it or not, you are constantly scanning other people's behavior and adapting your instincts about how to behave, how to talk, how to dress, or whether to take your shoes off on an airplane, which is now apparently a thing. This turns out to be a huge evolutionary advantage. Other animals have to depend on biological evolution, which takes hundreds of years in order to make big changes. We, with all of our scanning and adapting, can take advantage of sociological evolution, which moves much faster. This is why we, and not ants or birds, keep up with the Kardashians. 4, unwritten rules are cheat codes. Every unwritten rule begins life as a workaround. There's a problem. Several people try to solve it in various ways. One of the ways sticks, and it spreads from person to person, group to group, and society to society. Now, if you want to find these cheat codes, there are 2 good places to look. The first is in a place that has too many written rules, as we've discussed. And the second is where there are no written rules at all. Remember Lord of the Flies, the 1950s British novel about a group of boys stranded on an island with no adult supervision? Now, if you haven't read it, spoiler alert, things do not go well. Everybody freaks out. There's some torture and a bit of killing. But my larger point is that we human beings do not tolerate an absence of rules. Inevitably, we'll just hack some together and hold each other accountable. And finally, 5, we reinforce unwritten rules with subtle cues. We don't need police to enforce unwritten rules. We just have to leverage the fact that we're social animals. We think we're individualists, particularly in the West, especially in the United States. But in the event you have not noticed, we all dress about the same. And we all wear our hair about the same. And we all talk about the same. And we all eat about the same foods and follow about the same customs. Now, this isn't a problem. It's not even a lack of imagination. It's an adaptation. Remember, for most of the past 200,000 years, human beings were small, slow, and puny. And we were doing everything we could not to be eaten by animals that were bigger, faster, and stronger. And what we did, our competitive advantage, was that we could coordinate our behaviors. And so fast forward That's what now allows us to build cities and do science. But because we are social animals, we do not like to be alone. And when we're with other people, we do not like to be ostracized. So it does not take much to keep us in line. A look, a glare, a half smile is usually enough to reward us when we do something right, like turn around and face the doors in an elevator, or punish us when we do something wrong, like talk about ourselves too much at a party. So at this juncture, I'm always asked the same question. Jeff, how do I change unwritten rules? This is a great question, and we do not have time to get into it. However, I will tell you what you cannot do. You cannot change an unwritten rule by adding a written rule. As a former colleague of mine used to say, if you have to put up a sign to tell employees to wash their hands, you have already lost the war. No, you change unwritten rules by replacing them with new, better unwritten rules. Yes, this is hard, but it's critically important to my work, and it might be to yours. I take on social problems for a living, public education and healthcare and homelessness, genocide, lots and lots of problems. And in my work, I have found that unwritten rules are always where things go wrong. Take hunger. You've no doubt noticed that we throw away more than enough food to feed every hungry person. Heck, the people in this room right now have probably thrown away enough food in the past week at home, in restaurants, in the cafeteria, to feed every hungry person in this community. So what's that about? It's about unwritten rules. Unwritten rules like, don't reward people who don't work. Don't donate half-eaten meals. Don't invite hungry people into your homes. These are not laws. These are just unwritten rules that over decades have morphed into common sense and that we reinforce with social cues. Consider the gender wage gap. In 2017, a woman in the United States working full-time made about 20% less than a man. This has been a problem for a very long time, and we haven't been able to solve it. And the reason is unwritten rules. Social traditions like encouraging girls to be nurses and teachers instead of doctors and administrators, or labeling girls as lousy at math, or discouraging women from promoting themselves. Again, these are not laws. These are just social cues that we consistently reinforce. So to change these conditions, to solve these problems, we have to find and replace these faulty triggers. This is why we're at a crossroads. Because for the very first time, we know precisely how we are the problem. Sure, we need smarter technology and better algorithms. Sure, we need more laws. But mostly, we need to find and replace the unwritten rules that hold these conditions locked in place. And then finally, we'll be able to solve the most important problems in the world. Thank you.